Hi booktube, Erin here, hope you're doing very well. Today I'm going to be going through everything I read in the month of April. I'm doing this a bit later than I'd like, and also a bit later than I planned, but I've decided to separate the wrap-up videos and the reading plan videos to give me a bit more space, and you know, I don't like the feeling that I'm rushing through each book, so hopefully this will give me a little more space. The first three things that I'll be talking about I've already sort of discussed at a little more length in a reading update that I did sort of part way through the month of April, so I'll sort of gloss over those and then hopefully then get lost in the weeds a little more with the other books that I read in April. I've already gone through and talked about my reading plans for May, so that's a separate video, so you can have a look at that separately if you want to. So let's go through the three books that have already been discussed in the reading update, just for the sake of being a completionist. First up, we've got The Letters of Vincent van Gogh, which is selected and edited by Reynold Deleu and translated by Arnold Pomerantz. So it's a selection of his letters, but it really felt like a novel or like a really in-depth biography. There was wonderful bridging material given to us by the editor, giving us an idea of what was going on in his life between the letters, giving us a bit of context, which I found invaluable really, and helped it feel really immersive. So I really loved this, and so far it's been my favourite thing that I've read this year. The other one, well, the second of the three is Água, Viva by Clarice Lispector. This is translated by Stefan Tobler, and this was really intriguing. Not entirely sure what to think of it, I suppose. It's sort of aphoristic. It's very much the mind of a character, or the mind of the writer going through what it is to write, what it is to create, and what it is to sort of to be in a moment, and to capture the sort of potentialness of each moment. I think the word instant is sort of what she's getting at in that book. And then I read a couple of Icelandic sagas that are grouped together, both very short sagas. The Vinland Sagas, so both sagas concerning the sort of Nordic explorations to the New World, and the area that they called Vinland. There were two sagas concerning this, both in this, the Sagas of Icelanders, a wonderful Penguin Deluxe edition, one of my favourite sort of physical books that I have. And the two sagas are the Saga of the Greenlanders and Eric the Red's saga. I slightly prefer the Saga of the Greenlanders in just the way it's written and the feel of it, I suppose, but both are really intriguing, and so I'd recommend them. They're both very short, and yeah, worth checking out. So then we'll jump into the books that I haven't already discussed, that I've read since those books. We've got a couple of books of poetry to start us off, just as a warning. We've got This Afterlife, the selected poems of A.E. Stallings, a poet I really quite like. Before reading this, I'd only read one collection by her called Like, which is really good, and many of the poems from that collection are included in here. Her style is sort of very much looking at an intersection between the ancient world, whether that's ancient history or through mythology, and then trying to sort of splice that together with sort of domestic scenes, or sort of very everyday sort of things, and it often works really, really well. It not only helps you look at the myths differently, but I think it also helps you look at life a little differently as well. So I'm a big fan of Stallings, and it was interesting to see her sort of growing as a poet. That sort of blend between the everyday and the mythic or the classic was there from the get-go in the selection, and yet it seemed to blossom and get stronger as her career goes on, particularly by the time that we get to the poems from the collection Like, which I was already familiar with. It just felt that much more strong, and there was a bit more confidence there, I think, in dealing with it, but not to say that there wasn't a confidence in her earlier poems, if that makes sense. It was sort of just delightful to see, her beginnings, I suppose, but to see how strong she was starting off, and then just to see her mature as a poet. And hopefully there'll be many more collections from her. We'll see. I have read a few poems that were published in poetry magazines and things since Like came out, which aren't in here. So hopefully there'll be another collection from her soon. The other work of poetry then is Poet in New York by Federico Garcia Lorca, and this is translated by someone. It doesn't say on the back. Let's see if it says. It's translated by Greg Simon and Stephen F. White, and quite intriguing. I've read selections from this before in Lorca's selected poems, and the bits I liked from that I recognised and remembered in here. Very hard to sort of summarise, and I find it very hard to to sort of discuss exactly what's going on in the poems. Very fragmented. I mean, the word surrealistic comes up a lot when people talk about Poet in New York. It's very different to, I don't know, Andre Breton, or even like, I suppose René Char isn't really a surrealist, but he was coming to mind. But more of the poets, sort of the French poets, and I'm familiar with some sort of British poets of a sort of surrealistic bent. It didn't quite feel like them, and seeing from the introduction and seeing Lorca discuss the poems in a lecture that's in the back of the book, there was much more of an intent and a sort of symbolism, almost not quite a symbolism, but something close to symbolism, in his decision making to use certain images and things. So it's not quite surrealism. Instead, it's just him trying to. I suppose it's more expressionist than anything else. But there's a wildness and a fragmentedness. If let's just read a poem that sort of reflects. This is Blind Panorama in New York. If it isn't the birds covered with ash, if it isn't the cries beating against the windows of the wedding, it is the delicate creatures of the air that spill fresh blood in the inextinguishable darkness. But no, it isn't the birds, because the birds will soon become oxen. They could become white rocks with the moon's help, and they are always wounded girls before the judges lift the cloth. So again, the thing I like about surrealism is the way you have this continual sort of thread of unexpected images from line to line. It's something I look for in a surrealist poet. The way that various unexpected and quite sort of disparate things can create something new and get you to look at things a little differently. However, there's just something about this that felt a little unresolved and a little sort of flat for me. I don't know exactly how to explain it. And then there were some other poems in here quite early on, I think it was poems. What was it called? It's just a section of 3 poems called The Blacks. He visited Harlem and found a very different world to the rest of New York, and he kind of wanted to express that. And I think it really was coming from a place of sympathy, and yet there were just bits that felt too stereotypical. There was a kind of, I don't know, weird sort of jungle fever around a lot of the imagery he's using. It felt stereotypically African and not at all reflective of just the normal day-to-day lives of people in Harlem. And so yeah, there's a bit of a mismatch there that I felt a bit odd about as I was reading. So I'll be coming back to Lorca at some point in the future, but yeah, I'm still not entirely sure what I think of him. Moving on, and this might be something that takes a bit of time to talk about. I read the last book in a series in a steampunky sci-fi fantasy sort of series, translated from the French. So this last book was called The Storm of Echoes. It's by Christelle Dabos, and it is translated by, is it Hildegard Searle, I believe? Yeah, Hildegard Searle. And the series is called the Mirror Visitor series, all about a sort of alternate, or sort of possible, if you can, yeah, maybe not so possible, version of our world that is very fragmented. Literally, the world has been blown apart into these various arcs, fragments of Earth, floating above some kind of void, and each arc has its own culture. It has its own family spirit, a kind of almost godlike creature that it's believed that everyone on that arc has descended from, and that family spirit has certain powers, certain properties that are passed down to most of the people who live on the arcs. Our main character is called Ophelia, and she comes from an arc called Anima, which, as the name suggests, is the powers are all to do with objects and animation. So some people can make objects move, can heal objects. Ophelia, yeah, she can make objects move. She can read the history of objects, so she can essentially read the thoughts and feelings of people who've touched the object in the past. There's a humorous bit in the first book where she has to take a bath, and she hates taking baths because she's got so many other people's memories on the porcelain that she's just reading with her body. And she can also move through mirrors, which is a key part of the book, and of the whole situation of the book and the series. In the first book, A Winter's Promise, she's essentially married off by her family to, or at least promised in marriage to, this man called Thorn, who is the sort of counsellor of the exchequer of some other arc called the Pole up in the north. And it's very different. Her arc, Anima, very homely, very family focused. Anima is very aristocratic, full of intrigue and backbiting, and also sort of literal backstabbing. There's always the fear of assassination and of all kinds of things as people are trying to work their way to the top. So the first couple of books are primarily concerned with Ophelia getting used to and trying to survive in Anima, as the bride-to-be of Thorn, who isn't particularly well, in the Pole. And yeah, her husband-to-be, Thorn, is not terribly well liked, and it's sort of working out why, like, her of all people have been promised to him, and what the motivations behind this prospective marriage might be, and just understanding the Pole, the politics, and the culture there, the various powers, the various families, and the family spirit himself, Farouk. Book 3 that I read, I think in March, is then essentially by the beginning of that book, the world's expanded a little bit. You sort of realise a little more of a little more of why the world is like it is, and there's an overarching aim to get to. There's an actual villain that they're trying to beat, and they're also just trying to work out who the villain is. There's a shroud of mystery around the villain. Doing my best not to give too much away. By this 4th book, it is sort of even bigger, I suppose, and sort of going into the past of the villain, trying to work out exactly who they are. You're getting more information about why the world is the way it is, and I suppose it sort of underlines something about the whole series that I really liked, which was that there's this big world with this really weird premise of these fragments, these people with various powers of void. The world is falling apart. There are these things called echoes that are causing landslides. There are these weird shadowy characters who are turning up and disappearing, and things like that. There's this character who seems to be able to split herself into 2 and exist in what's almost a parallel world, and it's sort of working out exactly why all this stuff is happening. And I really quite liked it. I won't give too much away, but yeah, I thought it does end relatively openly. I thought in a way that actually respects you as a reader to sort of work things out, or to not want everything sort of spelled out for you as to what happens to the characters once the sort of arc of the whole series is closed. I have seen that some other people don't particularly like that, my wife among them. So yeah, but I really quite liked it. The only gripe I had, I suppose, was that there's a kind of almost magic system as to why the world is the way it is. It's sort of the laws of physics of this imagined universe, and sort of trying to piece everything together at the end, working out why certain things happen to certain characters. I was sort of realizing that there was a bit of a mismatch with the way it was explained to you and the way the plot ended up. And I sort of got the impression that this system, these laws of physics, weren't completely worked out in the mind of the author, I think. And it's not that it wasn't clear enough. I think it was clear enough, and I think for it to be explained more or explored more, it would have been quite tedious. I quite liked the way that there was a sort of a gradual explanation of the world. It reminded me very much of the Earthsea books by Ursula K. Le Guin, and the way that she just sort of tells you enough about the world as you're going through for you to understand what's happening in the story as you're going through, and you have this sense that there's much more of the world that could be explored with other characters, but that's not the book that you're reading. You're focusing on these elements. Lord of the Rings is I suppose a little bit similar, but I suppose there's a bit more explanation and a few more quite long conversations. But yeah, I quite liked that about it. But I feel like had this system been a little more concrete in the mind of the author before finishing off the series, things would have made a bit more sense, potentially. But that's all I really have to say about the Mirror Visitor books. So yeah, this last one, Storm of Echoes, I quite enjoyed. The first one is called A Winter's Promise, and that and the following book, The Missing of Claire de Lune, are probably still the two best books in the series. But as a whole, I thought it was very good. We've got 3 more books to go. It's 2 of them I don't think I have too much to say about, but this next one might be another one where I ramble on a little bit. So I'm glad we've got a bit of time. This again probably maybe comes in second place, at least in terms of books that aren't poetry for me, from what I've read in April. and it's The Prague Cemetery by Umberto Eco. And this is translated, before I forget, by, let's have a look, by Richard Dixon, who I think has translated, I think he's probably translated most of the ones behind me there as well. The Prague Cemetery is sort of following the life of a character called Simone Simonini, and he is from, I believe, from Turin. He's Piedmontese, so back when there was the Kingdom of Piedmont, which I think is in the north of Italy, and it's very much an immersion in the world of 19th century Europe, of the politics and the intrigue and the spycraft and the conspiracies and the newspapers and the literature and just the general thinking in the sort of mid to late 19th century. Simonini himself, his profession, sort of starts out, he has a law degree, and he ends up in this sort of shady business of essentially creating the quote unquote genuine document that you might need. So say if you want to swindle someone out of their will, well then Simonini can conveniently produce the genuine will that will, because he absolutely believes you're the one who should get the most out of it, and so of course it's the right document, and of course it all works in your favour, and so he makes miracles happen for money. He's a Simonist, which I found very satisfying with his name, and he gets embroiled in all kinds of schemes, but it's really a book about seeing and believing, about how it's something that's said by one of the characters in the book towards the end, and it's about how what you believe affects what you see, how you act, and all of that, more than the other way around. And so it's all a book about these biases, these prejudices. A big example, so Simonini himself, and sort of part of the reason why he's so happy to help people with these various conspiracies is because he's a character who hates absolutely everyone. There's a chapter in here, I think, called Who Am I, right near the beginning. Called Who Am I, where essentially, in order to get an introduction to him, it's not his life story, where he was born. I think there's a bit of that in there, but it's primarily a list and an explanation of why he hates all the people that he hates. Not individuals, but groups. Notably, hates women, hates Jesuits, hates the Jews, hates the French, hates the Germans. That he's into phrenology, so he's quite dismissive of anyone who may have the slightest tinge of African descent, so a lot of that weird sort of eugenics stuff in there as well. So all in all, a really, really horrible person, and a really, really strange person to get in the head of. So that's something to bear in mind as you're reading it. And I'm trying to remember. Yeah, so it's essentially that there are all these people that he hates, and all these possible schemes that are going on, and he's sort of constantly almost pitting one against the other, but there is this sort of genuineness to he just hates these people, and he sort of has to believe certain things about them, and so he has to sort of doctor the evidence that he knows in a way, in some kind of way, it must be true, even if word for word what he's written is untrue. So that there's a big example in here. One of the sort of prime focuses sort of over the length of the book, particularly when you get towards the end, are the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was a real life document that was sort of flagrantly anti-Semitic, going into why Jews from around the world had this universal conspiracy to take over the world through the banks, through politics, and through, money lending, through anything else. And although in the early 20th century it was debunked by the Times, it still spread because people, even if it has been debunked, wanted to believe it. So infamously, it was a big influence on Hitler, and I think it's sort of an interesting case in point to have that in your mind about something being debunked, couldn't possibly really be true, and yet you have this compulsion to believe it because it backs up what you already think. So it's there with anti-Semitism, it's there with anti-clerical thinking, with fear of the Masons and occultism. That's also very much in here. Sometimes the weird ideas about a universal Jewish conspiracy and a universal Masonic conspiracy are hand in hand. In other respects, they're pitted one against the other, and it's just sort of an interesting but very terrifying look at about that weird and sort of awful phenomenon. And it's also just an incredible sort of look into all the weird ideas going on in the 19th century, and it's full of these illustrations from the period that Eco had sort of got together mostly from his own collection to make it feel like a novel from the period. So you've got those, like a sensational 19th century novel. And then the structure of the book itself is quite interesting as well. There are sort of three different voices in the book. There's an overall sort of narrator who's found Simonini's diary, and then there's Simonini's diary itself, which has two people in it. There's Simonini himself, and this priest called Piccola. Is that his name? Something like Piccola. Dalla Piccola, who's a priest who lives next door. But it just so happens that both of them have a bit of trouble with their memories, and there's a secret passageway leading from one apartment to the other, and so are they really the same person? Are they two different people? There's something that has to be worked out as you make your way through the book, and is eventually resolved. And it's just a very odd and crazy book. I think it would be helpful to have a rough idea about I suppose a rough idea of what the protocols of the Elders of Zion was. It goes quite deep towards the beginning of the book into Italian history and politics, into Garibaldi and the war being fought there for a republic in Italy, a unification of Italy against against sort of the Bonapartist states, if I'm remembering correctly, and certainly against sort of many monarchists. No, actually no, because they're trying to set up their own monarch, so I can't remember exactly how it works. So maybe I could have done with reading up a bit more on Garibaldi. But it's just, he's going in deep into a lot of the history of the period. And then you end up in France. There's the Dreyfus affair towards the end of the book that, of course, our character is involved in, since it's a very important event in French history and in the history of anti-Semitism. And so, it's a really, really interesting book, but hopefully, it's hard to lay it all out sort of chronologically and tell you exactly what happens, which I think will be missing the point to a certain extent. But I hope that's given you a flavour of what the book's like, on the positive and the negative side, because I'm very aware that this book does go to some quite dark places, and it might not be everyone's cup of tea, but it deals with a lot of things I find very interesting, and I'm continually intrigued by, and feel it's important to understand better. 2 more books, and they're both poetry books. This next one I definitely don't have too much to say about at all. It's Reconnaissance by Phillips, and it was okay. It's probably my least favourite work of poetry that I've read so far this year. Not that in a sort of very active way. Active is the wrong word, but I didn't really feel it was bad in that sense. I just felt it was a bit. I just sort of wish there was a bit more to it, I suppose. It just felt underwhelming by the end. However, he can really, I love the way he can turn a phrase. He can, just say things in a way that you would never think of saying it, which is, one of the things that you look for in a poet. I'm trying to remember one that I quite like. I probably won't be able to find one. However, so by the end, you just feel like a lot of the poems, even if they're set in different places, describing different things, that really, as a collection as a whole, it's essentially, it seems to just be about a breakup or a relationship breaking down, and that being reflected in various ways. And I think that's one of my least favourite things to at least focus on, to have as the main element of a collection. And after a while, that was all I could see in the poems. And so, I've seen that Phillips is a very well-respected poet, and I'm sure I've read things by him that I really liked, and there were some poems in there that I liked quite a lot. But as a collection as a whole, I think it could have done with being a bit longer, and you could have had sequences that were dealing with the relationship, but to have something to offset, I suppose. Fiona Benson, I think, can do that quite well, having a collection almost in halves. I think that's all I'll say about Phillips. And then finally, I read the complete poems of Marianne Moore, maybe a little too quickly. I was saying a while ago in, I think, my last video, or last but one video, that there was an early poem by her called, and I always forget the name of the poem because it's quite an odd name. It's called Smooth Gnarled Crepe Myrtle. And I love that poem just for the way it sounds and feels, for her use of language. And although there are moments in here that really made me smile, I suppose, on the whole, just found it a little difficult to connect with her. So I don't want to be too unkind, because there is something I recognise across her career as a poet that I really like and enjoy. But I don't completely get her yet, I think, is what I'm trying to say. The other poem I really quite liked, that I almost liked as much as Smooth Gnarled Crepe Myrtle, or I'm sure some of those words were the other way around. But there was a poem in here somewhere that I'm trying to find, I think from the same period, and it was just really lovely. I wasn't expecting it to sound and feel the way it was. So I'm going to have to find it, page 95. I think it's called What Are Years? And there was just a moment in there that was really lovely. Awkwardly the sentence begins towards the end of the first line of a stanza, which you don't have to worry about, listening to, but is find it awful to begin at the end of a line. He sees deep and is glad, who accedes to mortality, and in his imprisonment rises upon himself as the sea in a chasm, struggling to be free and unable to be. In its surrendering finds its continuing. Which I liked. I liked that image. I liked the sound of it. I think I'm not a massive fan. She likes to use sort of syllabics. I'm not sure if that's exactly the right word, but she'll have a plan as to the amount of syllables in a line, and if there's going to be a rhyme scheme to the poem, then that'll determine the last syllable that she's going to use. So sometimes words are split up, and I think for reading the poem, it feels incredibly artificial sometimes. So ending on words like as, to be, who, and things like that. I often find, particularly when you're ending on a connective, it never particularly works for me, and she often has to force herself to do that just to get her system to work. And perhaps the point of it is to get you to read a little slower, and certainly on the poems where it feels more prevalent, you're forced to do that. But even in the poems that I like by her, there's a certain awkwardness on my part with how I'm dealing with them. So yeah, again, not 100% sure on my thoughts as a whole on Marianne Moore, but we'll get there. But that's it. I'll leave it there because I've been talking for nearly 40 minutes. It's a good thing that I just imagined how long the video would be if I had included everything I wanted to read in May along with that. And so, hopefully there's at least something interesting in there, in that relatively varied bunch of books. I'm currently reading Paradise Lost and Randall Jarrell's selected poems, and I'm hoping to get back to The Anatomy of Melancholy soon, so I'll let you know how that's going as soon as I can. But I'll leave it there. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.